Hey, everybody, it's your main man, Anthony Brogdon, here with you once again. And I got a fella on the channel that, let me tell you something. I've known him a bunch of years. And since the first time I met him, I was extremely impressed with him. But I'm impressed with him because of his career path and what he does for a living. He's a highly successful attorney, well thought of in around Detroit, which is where I'm headquartered and whatnot. But and then just by chance, I was talking to another guy, and he said, "Hey, man, I've been watching your show. You got to have Taylor Segue on." I said, "Really?" He said, "Man, this guy know what he talking about." So I hit him up, and he said, "Man, I got something I want to share with you all, and you're gonna like what he got to tell you." He's got another angle to it that we don't usually talk about. I'll wait till he come on. But I'm jamming here, Strong Inspirations. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button on this video. I know you're gonna like it a lot. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. Like, did you see the video I just released with the guy out of Sierra Leone, Africa, who lives in America, went to the Morehouse, and is a big advocate on the Gullah Geechee corridor, and bringing those two, the Gullah Geechee and the people out Sierra Leone together because we related. Watch this. We related. So, like that video. Did you see the one I did with? And I'm gonna take you back just a tad. And this is how tough I am, everybody. How I find good folk. I got the 3-time great-grandson, and he is the 2-time great-grandson, 3-time of Frederick Douglass, 2-time of Booker T. Washington. They kids married, and he's a product of that relationship. If you didn't know that, you got to watch that video. Did you see the one I did with the guy who found out that his grandfather was a KKK super duper racist dude and killed the black guy? Watch that video. You see the one I did out of Birmingham, Alabama? My man ended his interview saying, "Hey, if Birmingham had not been so racist, the powers that be, it would be a different city today. It would be what Atlanta is," because they were looking at Birmingham first. There's some things that did not go down because of the racism. Watch that video. Oh, we jamming here, Strong Inspirations. Come on now. And so, you know, do what you got to do. Watch them. Tell somebody. Share this information. Don't keep it to yourself. The other thing on my own personal note is, you know, I got this movie out. It's called Business in the Black, The Rise of Black Business in America. There's going to be stuff in here that you did not know. I promise you that, about what Black folks did from slavery, and in particular in the business arena. Like, if you did not know, there were slaves who owned businesses. I name them in my movie. It's streaming on Amazon. And I wrote a book to continue the conversation. And it's more thorough. Get you a copy of my book, everybody. I'll autograph it for you. I like doing that. And every 10th book I sell, I donate one to a school. My numbers are up because you, my viewers, are responding to what I'm offering. And I offer it to you very inexpensively because I'd rather you have it than me. You can buy 2 or 3 of these with no hesitation. Y'all successful folk. I know you are, because you conscious. And so as a result, go on and get you a copy of my book. Now you can learn all about what I'm doing on my website, which is businessintheblack.net. Now you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word, man. I love me some strong. And strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And check it out. That is my introduction to my guest today. He's a strong soul brother coming out of the D with me. And without naming names, we in that same glorious fraternity, without naming names, but you know what it is. You know black and gold. That's all I'm gonna tell you, 1906. Got to go no further than that. So come on, gentlemen, introduce yourself. Let's get it on. Thank you for being here with me.
Well, Anthony, thanks for having me. When you first approached me, I saw this as an opportunity to tell a story that's not often told.
Right.
By, particularly African Americans.
Right.
Okay,
hold on. Let me stop you because I know you about to roll. Tell us your name. We didn't know who you are.
My name is Taylor Segue, and by training, I'm an attorney.
Right.
Okay. But I'm what you might say an amateur historian. Okay.
Let me stop you there. I don't mean no disrespect in this. I got to ask a couple questions about you personally. That helps my viewers know who I'm interviewing. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was born in Milwaukee while my father was in school at Marquette University. And then I was raised actually in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you know where the plantation is in your family?
Yeah, I know about several aspects of that, but more importantly than the slavery in my family, I know where the freedom was in my family.
Oh, let's do it. What's the story?
Well, I said I was born in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
My grandmother was from Wisconsin, my maternal grandmother, my mother's mother.
Yes.
And her family, the Phillipses, had been free blacks in Wisconsin since the 1830s.
Really?
Yeah, so they have documented their family in Wisconsin to the mid to late 1830s, to the extent that my mother actually qualified for what they call in Wisconsin a pioneer certificate. Because if you can document that your family lived in Wisconsin prior to 1848, when Wisconsin became a state, they give you in Wisconsin what's known as a pioneer certificate. So as a descendant of John Phillips, who was documented in Wisconsin in a newspaper article in 1838, my mother actually qualified for a pioneer certificate. Okay. I actually could qualify as well as her descendant, but I have yet to notify the state of Wisconsin.
What does the certificate do for you? What does that mean?
It just means that your family is a pre-statehood family in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, I got you.
So
how did they get to Wisconsin? Do you know that?
I've heard two stories. I've heard that, and I don't know the veracity of either one. I've heard that John Phillips was a freedman who went to Wisconsin from Kentucky. And I'm not certain of how that came about. Right. I heard an alternative story that he was actually a freedman from Canada who migrated in the reverse, who went from Canada to Wisconsin.
Okay.
And he had an important job in Milwaukee because Milwaukee was a city that had a lot of rivers. And so they had a lot of drawbridges. And he was a drawbridge operator in Milwaukee.
Okay. Now, but I do want to go back to it. So do you know how they got to Milwaukee?
I don't.
Okay, where they came from or something like that?
I just know that it was either Kentucky or Canada. And he ended up marrying an Irish woman who came here during the potato famine in the early to mid 1840s, named Delia Devitt. So the Phillipses were essentially a mulatto family whose, I guess the patriarch was John Phillips, a free black man. My grandfather was from a place called Okolona, Mississippi, and he migrated to St. Louis, and then on to Milwaukee. After he graduated from the University of Illinois, he finished the University of Illinois. In fact, he was on the first Alpha line at the University of Illinois in 1917. And he ended up leaving when he graduated from Illinois in the, I want to say I was like 1922, I believe, that he finished in college. He ended up in dental school at Marquette University in Milwaukee.
Okay.
So that was his road too. On the paternal side, my grandmother on my father's side of the family is descendant from a woman who became a free Black woman in 1793 in Louisiana before the Louisiana Purchase. Her name was Agnes Matthew, and the Matthew is spelled Mathieu, but the Matthews and the Segues are Creole families from Louisiana. And Agnes Matthew became a free Black woman in the 1790s, 1793, in fact, about 10 years before the Louisiana Purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if there was the plantations.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a foreign concept, although I will say I have a picture of my grandfather, maternal grandfather's, I want to say it was his grandmother.
Okay.
It was a former slave woman named Pretty Bailey in Mississippi.
Now, how did they, and you pick one that you might notice, how did they go to college? How was that? I mean, that's early time when they were astute enough, got a break somewhere, somebody helped them. Do you know any of that?
Yeah, my grandfather, Fred Bobo, was an outstanding football player in St. Louis at a school called Sumner High School. And when he graduated from Sumner High School, he was the captain of a football team that had been undefeated for 3 years. And so he actually had a choice between going to West Point or going to the University of Illinois. And when he got to the university, he decided not to go to West Point because there was an incident at West Point that I don't know if you're familiar with.
Right. Oh, no, maybe not. Go ahead. If you know it,
it actually involves a relative of Ulysses Boykin. Are you familiar with Ulysses Boykin? The judge here in Detroit.
Okay.
His uncle was one of the first Blacks at West Point and actually was put out in an incident where they said that he had actually tied himself up and beat himself up in order to shirk his responsibilities. And so when my grandfather learned of that incident involving Ulysses Boykin's relative, he determined that he did not want to go to West Point.
I got a number of stories in my book of West Point putting people out early, right before graduation and all that kind of stuff. So now when he's at Illinois, it ain't many other Black students running around there, I'm sure.
Oh, no, not in 1917 when he was there.
Yeah.
Although there was enough so that they actually created a chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha.
Yeah.
In 1917.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but there were not a lot of Black students at the University of Illinois in 1917. And then I want to say that when he got to dental school at Marquette University in the 1920s, there were even fewer.
Yeah, sure.
He may have been by himself. There may have been one or two.
Sure. Is there any stories of in your family where some racists tried to do something because you all are, smart, educated people trying to succeed, and they kicking him out of school or not trying to help him move along? Any of that kind of thing that you know?
Oh yeah, there's always those stories. I think there's a story on the Segue side of the family that I've never gotten to the gravamen of it. Because the Segues come out of Louisiana, Cato Parish, which is in northern Louisiana, and they ended up going to New Orleans. But there is a story about, I want to say my great-grandfather, who was the first Taylor Segue. I know I list myself as Taylor Segue the third, but there have actually been, I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I'm about the fifth one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was my great-grandfather who was also Taylor Segue, who I actually found was a delegate to the Republican convention in New Orleans in 1874 during Reconstruction.
Oh.
So, but there was a story about some land that he had supposedly accumulated that was stolen from the family, which was the cause of why, who would have been my great-grandmother and my grandfather left Cato Parish and went to New Orleans.
Yeah, there's always, not always, but a lot of times there's some of that kind of injustice. So all this.
I'll tell you great injustice.
Okay.
His sister, my grandfather's sister, the guy I call the second Taylor Segue, was a woman named Ruth Segue, and she married a guy named Joseph Bartholomew in New Orleans. And Joe Bartholomew, there's a golf course in New Orleans named after him today, called Joseph M. Bartholomew. He was actually a golf course architect and designed a lot of the golf courses in the New Orleans area, including the city course and the course at the country club out in Kenner that he couldn't play on. So this guy actually designed and built golf courses that he was not allowed to play on.
Wow. Wow. So what made you like Black history?
I've always liked history, period. And it's not just Black history, but I like all kinds of history. And in fact, I'm an incessant reader, of history.
Okay.
And try to understand it from a different perspective. Like the story I want to tell today.
Yeah. Let's go at the story. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, particularly since the 1619 project, there is this assumption that America developed from Jamestown. And the story of Black people in America is the story of Jamestown and its development. Jamestown was founded in 1608 or 1609, somewhere in there. But part of what we learn here in America take for granted as American history is we learn about English history and not about the real European history and the competition for really the new world that existed not only between the English, but between the English, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and in some cases, the Dutch. And a lot of the history that we don't know about is history that has been recorded by the French, by the Spanish, or the Portuguese.
Okay.
And in fact, when you study the settlement of North America, Jamestown was one of the late settlements. The very first settlement, and I'm going to talk about that one, would have been in 1526. Now, think about that. There's 1608, 1609, Jamestown. The first attempt was in 1526. The first successful attempt was in 1565, and that was St. Augustine, Florida.
Okay.
But the first attempt in 1526 ended by a bunch of bad luck and the very first slave rebellion in North America. And at the end of that slave rebellion, those slaves who had mutinied stayed in America and would have been the very first, and were indeed the very first people from across the ocean to live in North America.
And where were they? Was this Florida or someplace else?
They were in a place called, well, the actual name of the attempted settlement, let me start the story where it starts. The name of the settlement was San Miguel de Guadalupe. And it was a failed settlement in 1526 on a place in Georgia on what they call the Barrier Islands, called Sapalo Island. And this is really maybe about 40 miles south of what we call Savannah today.
Okay.
And it would have been on the Georgia coast. And the initial settlement, and the settlement was actually perpetrated by a guy named Lucas Vasquez de Leon. And de Leon, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly,
Okay.
was a wealthy sugar planter and a lawyer from Hispaniola. Hispaniola is what we know today as the Dominican Republic and Haiti, but it was really the first place that the Spanish headquartered when they came to the New World.
Okay.
And it was the center of where their operations were born. And de Leon had gotten a charter from the Spanish king, King Charles, to actually create a settlement in what we know as North America. He had done some initial, how I say it, scouting of the coast from really the Carolinas through Georgia.
Okay.
That area north, all the way down to, well, I guess what we would call North Florida.
Okay.
But it was primarily South Carolina and Georgia. And he had determined that it might be ripe for settlement. And as part of that, they actually, during their scouting parties, had actually captured about 70 or 80 Native Americans.
Right.
And they had one whose name was changed because he converted to Christianity. One of the things that was really important to the Spanish, race was less a consideration, religion was the entire consideration.
Okay.
They wanted you to be Catholic.
Right.
Because, you look at Columbus. Columbus discovered America in 1492. Columbus was actually Italian. He was from Genoa, and he had a commission from the Spanish kings who were in the process of throwing out the Muslims. In 1492, the Spanish monarchy had become Catholic again.
Okay.
And they had thrown out the Jews from Spain.
Okay.
The Jews had become part of Spain because in the year 700, Spain was invaded by the Muslims and had become a Muslim country.
Wow.
I mean, most of us don't understand that in 700, Tariq invaded Spain and turned Spain into a Muslim country. And it wasn't until about 1494 that the Muslims were defeated and finally thrown out of Spain.
Okay.
So it was Catholicism was the motivator for the Spanish.
Right.
And so de Leon had actually gone to the monarch and had introduced Francisco Chicora, who had become a Catholic, this Native American, and he sold them on what a great place North America was, all the gold and precious stones and the whole thing. So de Leon's trip to North America was actually financed by the Spanish crown.
And he had black people on the boat with him.
His party consisted of about 700 people, and there were about 600 Europeans and about 100 slaves.
Mm.
And so this, it was, I want to say about 3 ships that they took, and they started or tried to put the first settlement in South Carolina. But the ship that contained most of their provisions ran aground and sunk.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so they ended up in a bad situation because, you know, we talked about this, the ships that they used were much smaller than we think about them.
Okay.
You know, and when his primary ship sunk, they decided to move from South Carolina, and that's how they ended up at Sapalo Island.
Okay.
In really in Georgia, on the Georgia coast in what they call the Barrier Islands.
Okay, I've heard them terms, yeah.
Yeah, but when they got to Sapalo Island, they ended up in a bad winter. They had not enough provisions. There was D'Aleon himself died, and there was the captain who had taken over. There was a mutiny among the crew. I mean, any and everything that was bad that could befall an expedition befell this expedition.
Okay.
And what ended up saving them at the end was the slaves. When they mutinied, they took there was a group that wanted to abandon the settlement that day. And when the slaves heard of this, they went and they freed their captain, the gentleman who.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Okay.
They freed
I'm
him
with you.
and burned down the other place, but they also escaped. And so they actually, by the time that the expedition had gone back to Hispaniola, there were only 150 people left out of the 600.
Okay.
Who had gone. But all of the slaves, or the former slaves, had stayed in what was then North America.
Okay.
What we know as Georgia.
So they came and they branched out and developed their own communities?
Well, here's the good part, or the other counterintuitive part to the story. You know, we always assume that Native Americans were these small hunter-gatherer type communities.
Of Indians.
Yeah, of Indians, but it's just simply not true. Okay. The Native American presence in America was actually a civilization called the Mississippian Civilization.
Really? Okay.
And so if you go, have you ever been to Macon, Georgia?
Yeah,
There is a national historic area in Macon, Georgia.
Okay.
It became a national historic area in the 1930s that has Indian mounds. And it's called—
No, when you say mounds, what do you mean by mounds? What does that mean?
Earthen mounds, like pyramids.
Oh, really?
There was a city in Macon, Georgia, that they call the Okmulgee Settlement, that they estimate, based on the excavations there, had human habitation for over 17,000 years. And at the height of the Mississippian Civilization, they estimate that there were 30,000 to 40,000 people in the Okmulgee settlement. Really? Which is, yeah, so it was a major city that had mounds. It had what we consider like American pyramids. Mm-hmm. And what they don't tell you about the American Indians or Native Americans is that they were actually this civilization, and they had cities, large cities, built on earthen mounds in about 6 or 8 different locations. There's one near East St. Louis, there's one in Macon, there's another one in Tennessee, there's one in Minnesota. They don't tell you though that
never heard
they had this civilization.
Mhm.
And so the Mississippian civilization, this place, Apollo Island, where they were trying to establish this European settlement,
Mhm.
was about 190 miles southeast of a city of 30 to 40,000 people.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, think about that for a moment. Now you've
Okay.
got 100 Africans who have freed themselves about 190 miles southeast of a city of 30 to 40,000 people. Do you think for a moment that the people in that city didn't say, go find out what those guys are doing?
Okay, I got you there.
And so
Okay.
now you've always heard these stories about what they call Creek Indians. And
Yeah.
we know about the North Florida tribes where they say they were really dark.
All right.
Think about this. You got 100 African slaves who have freed themselves. And they now are coming in contact with a major civilization,
All right.
native civilization, that where they essentially have a city, but it's village life,
All
essentially.
right. All right. Sure. Sure.
And so these people live more like the Africans than the Europeans. So I'm fairly certain that what happened is that those 100 slaves integrated themselves and lived with the native populations.
Mm-hmm. What were those slaves? Is there a name to them?
Other than the Allion expedition.
Okay.
And you know, you can look this up under San Miguel de Guadalupe.
Yeah.
The name of the city that was supposed to be. And it's a well-documented story.
Yeah.
Except that no one knows what happened to those enslaved Africans after they freed themselves.
Oh, really? Okay.
But being only 190 miles away from a major city of Native Americans, I'm certain that they had contact.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now that only makes sense. So is there did they ever find any of those ships that came at that time, or the one that sank? Do you think they had an expedition to find that ship?
I don't think that they I think that the ship probably was taken apart, because what those people used to do is that if the ship sank, they would take it apart and use the wood and use the pieces either to build a new ship or to build.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, you had to use everything. You know, it was not like you could, oh, okay, the ship sank. No, the ship sank. Let's go get as much of the wood and get as much of the things that are on the ship that we can use to either build a new ship or build a settlement. I mean, so nothing went to waste.
Right, I got you.
When I had that conversation, and you were talking about on Columbus's ships, if he had slaves on his ships, think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
The ships that they sailed on were somewhere between 40 and 60 feet long. And you had to provision the ship. You know, I want to say the main ship that Columbus had was maybe 80 feet. And on those ships, you could get maybe 60, 65 men. You know, on the big ones, on the small ones, maybe you could get 30 men.
All right.
And so you'd have an expedition which might have 120 people in it. You don't have any room for slaves. The only people that you're going to take with you are experienced sailors,
right?
You know, mercenaries,
right?
Former soldiers. You go in someplace you've never been. You need people who know how to sail, how to use a sword, how to navigate. You don't have slaves work on plantations where you need lots of surplus labor, where space is limited.
Right.
And there can only be a few people. You want the best fighters, the best sailors, you know, people who are going to help you succeed in your mission.
Oh, sure, sure.
And
now, let me ask you this. The people, when they got on that ship, the 100, did they kill all of their captives? Or they died in the shipwreck? What happened to those white people that were with them? Do you know that?
Oh, the white people went back to Hispaniola.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yeah, those who survived went back. They said, hey, we failed, so we're going back to Hispaniola, but I guess the other 450 died, and because there were a number, and if you read the history of it, you see there were a number of Indian attacks. They were short on provisions. There had been an unusually cold winter. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing like a cold winter when you don't have a lot of provisions.
Yeah,
so
I got you.
Any and everything that could go wrong to the Alliance expedition did. And at the end of the day, the slave mutiny just kept them from even getting worse. But once the slave mutiny occurred, the slaves left. And they said, okay, you guys are on your own now.
Right. Now, let me.
I like
that.
The first community ended with a successful slave rebellion.
And is there a title for that rebellion? Maybe you said it or not. Did they call it something or? Okay, not that you know. This
slave mutiny by the Alliance slaves.
Okay.
Slave mutiny.
Well, did any of those slaves try to go back to Africa? Is there a note of that? Okay.
I think that those slaves lived in Georgia, in North Florida.
But the other thing you said, those slaves had first been slaves in Dominican and the Caribbean islands.
In Dominican Republic.
Okay. So what do we call it? So when you sum this up, you're actually saying 1619 is not the first date of slaves getting to America.
No, 1526 is.
Yeah, okay.
And slaves that came in 1526 freed themselves.
So they never did get to be slaves in America for the most part.
No.
When we talk about this in the 1619, is there a note of this story to maybe give the truthful story? Or do you think they wouldn't want to tell this because it would inspire us too much?
I think that the history of Black people in America is always obscured. Because how many Black people know what a Maroon is?
Exactly.
How many know? Well,
Yeah.
When at the end of this story in 1526, those 100 slaves were the first Maroon community. But they weren't the only Maroon community in the southeast of the United States. There was a Maroon community in North Florida. There was another one in Mississippi. There was a Maroon community in South Carolina. I mean, there were a number of Maroon communities, and all Maroons were freed slaves. So it's the real untold story in America. It's the story of Black freedom. It's not the story of Black slavery. Blacks assumed that they were slaves, even when they weren't. Slavery is kind of seen as the baseline, but all during slavery in America, 20 to 30% of people of African descent were free. But we never focus on the stories of freedom. The very first story of African slaves in America is a story about African slaves who freed themselves. They became free men. That was our first contact with America. We didn't become slaves. We became free. We went from slave to free. And so that's the untold story of Blacks in America. It's the stories of freedom. We saw the story of one of the movie that is the most poignant in recent times was 10 Years a Slave.
Right.
Well, that's a true story. It's the story of Solomon Northup. And the part of his story we focused on was his time, his 10 years in antebellum slavery. But how did Solomon Northup become free? And how did he live before those 10 years? And how did he live after those 10 years? No one's asked that question.
I got you. And I guess what you're also saying is when those 100 freed themselves, no one came soon enough to try to capture them. You know how they see black people, we're gonna just make you our slave. You think that we could assume that they lived the rest of their lives as free people?
They did. They lived with those Indians. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
190 miles away was a city of 30 to 40,000 people. Where do you think they went?
Yeah, right.
That's where they went.
Right, I got you. Now, you just used the term before we come to a close. I want everybody to make sure they're clear. You said maroons. What is a maroon, and explain that a little bit more. I mean, I got somebody on the other channel. She talks about the Maroon community out of Virginia. But yes, there were, as you mentioned, there were others. Well, explain that.
There were several of them. Maroon communities were simply communities where former slaves had freed themselves and now lived as free men in their own communities. And they called them Maroons, and it actually is a Spanish word. And I'm trying to think. There were a number of Maroon communities, not just in North America. They had them in Florida. Yeah. They were in Cuba. They were in Mexico. They were in Central America. They were all over. Wherever there were slaves in the Americas, there were people who didn't want to be slaves who freed themselves. Just like the very first in the Allione expedition, who freed themselves. And once they did that, they became what they call Maroons. One of the motivations of, who's the guy on the $20 bill? Andrew Jackson.
Right.
One of his motivations for the Trail of Tears, to clear out the native people in the Southeast, was a Maroon community in North Florida that had aligned itself with the Creek Indian tribes and had actually defeated US soldiers on at least 2 to 3 different occasions.
That's right.
You know, because they would go into those slums. You talked about it when you told me about Fort Mose. Yeah. Someone came on your show and talked about Fort Mose.
That's right.
Fort Mose was a Maroon community, and they had defeated US Army on 2 or 3 different occasions.
That's right. That's right.
And so it was really the motivation to get rid of the Maroon community in North Florida, to get rid of the Maroon community in Mississippi that had aligned themselves with the Native Americans. Now that didn't always hold. Sometimes the Native Americans found it in their interest to align themselves with the Europeans.
When we talk about, and you said this term, I'm just going for clarification, freed themselves, you actually mean they escaped. Is that one of the ways that when you mean that, or they actually just killed their captors? Could be another option.
Well, they escaped. Sometimes they killed their captives. You know, sometimes it was bloody, sometimes it was not. Sometimes, you know, it just depends on whose gang was the strongest, who had the most fight in them, you know, who had the most weapons.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there were always slave rebellions. That was a given. And depending upon how it went down, you know, Nat Turner was not the only one.
Right.
What was supposedly the worst of the slave rebellions occurred in 1811 down in Louisiana.
Oh, really?
On the sugar plantations. They estimated 200 to 500 slaves who were in the process of freeing them slaves in Louisiana. But it was brutally, brutally repressed. I mean, and at the end of it, it wasn't put down by the US government. It was put down by a vigilante army of the plantation owners, who at the end of the day, without trial, without legal recourse, took the slaves who had participated and cut off their heads, stuck them on pikes.
Oh my God.
They cut off their heads and stuck them on pikes. No one went to trial. Everyone was killed. And they were either hanged or beheaded. This happened in 1811. And it was, you know, one of the things that occurs in a slave society is that slaves, because they are valuable property, come to outnumber slave owners. That's right. What happened in Haiti. What happened in Haiti is that the slaves became 90% of the population. Between the slaves, the free people of color, the other Africans, they had become 90% of the population. The slave owners were only 10% of the Haitian population. And they were so outnumbered that the slave rebellion was a dangerous time for them.
Okay.
The white man today is still afraid. This is why he needs the Second Amendment of the slave rebellion. That's why he is so vehemently opposed to Black Lives Matter. That's why he needs the Second Amendment. It's all born out of fear of the slave rebellion. He's never gotten over it.
Wow. And yeah, because we don't talk about that. Well, we do talk about the escape, but we don't talk about how it happened in many instances.
Well,
not in the rebellion standpoint. Yeah.
We don't talk about freedom. You know, if you say the word maroon to a group of Black people, they'd be like, well, what is that? What's a maroon? How do
yeah.
What is that? You say slave, they know what you're talking about.
That's
oh,
right.
Yeah, you know, slave, you know, my great-grandfather was a slave.
Right.
And you know, there's always this fiction. There's what I call the Kunta Kinte fiction. Like the Europeans were going into Africa, throwing nets over people, capturing them. That's not how it happened. Most of the slave journeys came to be because one African was sold by another African to a European.
That's right.
I mean, that's how 90% happened. Because most of the West African, there were substantial kingdoms in West Africa.
That's right.
And those kingdoms said, no, we're not going to have Europeans coming into our territory. You're going to have to be on the coast. You set up on the coast, put your flag up so we know whether you're Portuguese, Spanish, English, Dutch. We want to know who you're representing, the French.
Okay, I love it.
Flag up.
I love it.
And then we're gonna bring a group. We'll bring you some slaves. We got some gold. We want some guns. We want some textiles. We want some of the things that you guys have, and we'll give you some of the things that you want. We know you want slaves. We know you want gold and some of the other things that we have to offer. And so it was trade. Most slaves were traded by Africans to Europeans.
That's true.
The slave trade is as old as time in Africa. And, you know, we talk about, because we're Americans and we're in North America, the Atlantic slave trade, which, you know, 10 to 12 million Africans were bargained away in the Atlantic slave trade. Well, on the other coast in East Africa, there were 10 to 12 Africans bargained away in the Indian Ocean slave trade. When you add the numbers up, it was 20 to 25 million Africans that left Africa as slaves. And some
initially they went to Brazil and places like that before they came to America.
Well, that's because it was the Portuguese. It was the Portuguese who actually figured out how to sail the oceans. And the Portuguese, a lot of their stuff was in Brazil by treaty. And the Spanish had the treaties for a lot of the Caribbean islands and Mexico and Central America and Florida. But it was the Portuguese had the treaties and the rights to Brazil. And part of that had to do with the fact that if you became, there are only two kinds of sailors in the world, only two kinds. And they are freshwater sailors, people who know how to sail on lakes and rivers, and saltwater sailors, people who know how to sail on oceans. When you sail on oceans, you have to understand the winds and the currents. And it was the Portuguese that actually developed a ship that could actually sail on the ocean currents on the coast of Africa. So the Portuguese knew how to sail up and down the coast of Africa and then over to Brazil based on the currents and the winds. You had to have the currents and the winds. And you had to have certain kinds of sails on the ship. The ships that Columbus had, I want to say he had a couple of carracks, one carrack, in fact, and he had one carrack, and two other ships were what they call caravels. And the caravels were ships that could actually sail against the wind. And you had to have a certain shape of sail in order to sail against the wind. You had to have a triangular lentine sail, and not the big square sails that you see for the ocean-going sails. The carracks had the big square sails and smaller lentine sails. The caravels, on the other hand, were smaller, faster ships, somewhere between 40 and 60 feet, but they had more of the triangular sails and could actually sail into the wind, which was necessary when you're doing ocean sailing. So I mean, this was important to how Portugal actually developed as a naval power.
When we talk about as we come to a close or what have you, what could have changed the course of history in terms of slavery in America? If something would have went differently, what do you think that, if you can surmise this, what could have went differently that things could have gone, America would not be the slaveholding nation that it was? Is there something to that?
Yeah, but slavery was insidious, and American slavery was insidious because you turned people into chattel, like things. I mean, a person was no better than that printer back there.
Yeah.
But the real insidiousness of America was when they linked slavery with racism, because slavery wasn't always linked to race. I mean, slavery is an old institution, and absolutely every race of people has been slaves. Every single one, whether you English, Irish, German, Scandinavian, Chinese.
Really?
Oh, everybody's been a slave. Every group of people has been enslaved. But it was a power thing. And it was the whole development of the plantation system and the really the establishment of the primacy of private property. And when you could take slavery and make people turn people into private property, it changed things. And it was the plantation system and the vast need for labor in the plantation system that fueled this country. Initially, in 1619, there was no paradigm for slavery. Even the African slaves that 1619 tells you were brought here as slaves were really indentured servants, because there was no legal paradigm for slavery in America. That didn't develop until about 20 or 30 years later. There were two cases of note. One is the Punch case, and the other is the Caser case.
Okay.
And the Caser case, and these came out of both the Virginia and Maryland legal systems. And the actual slave laws didn't go into place until 1705. It didn't happen in 1619. I want to say the Casar case occurred in 1640, some 20 years later, and the Punch case happened in like 1655.
Those cases was based on what? What were those cases? The basis of it.
Casar was a case where actually the plaintiff in the case was a former indentured servant himself by the name of Anthony Johnson, who you could say was a former slave, and he had an indentured servant or slave, as you might call it, on his plantation, who didn't like the way he was being treated, so he asked to be sold to a neighbor. And Anthony Johnson, of course, was Black, but the guy he sold to the neighbor was white, and he decided that he didn't get a good price for his slave, John Casar. And so what he did is that he sued his neighbor in court to get Casar back. And when he got him back, part of what was determined in the judgment is that Casar would serve the remainder of his natural life in the service of Anthony Johnson.
Oh.
And so arguably the first real slave legally in America belonged to a former slave himself. And that was the Casar case. The other case was the Punch case. And Punch is an interesting case because it's part of what gave me an interest in this subject. Punch, believe it or not, is an ancestor to both Ralph Bunche and Barack Obama. And I say Barack Obama, not from Obama's father, but Obama's mother, who was related to Punch. Punch escaped his indenture along with two white indentured servants. And when they were recaptured, typically what you had to do, they extended your indenture. John Casar were the first two real slaves serving their natural lives in America.
Oh my God. And is there and all this, as you said, and this that close us out, all this happened because we need help tilling the soil. We want people to do the things that our friends don't want to do. And so we're going to use Black people in those roles.
African slaves became really necessary because, in my opinion, the cost of transportation kept going down. The cost of getting on a ship and going from Europe to North America was reducing. And so as it reduced, fewer and fewer Europeans wanted to sign the indenture contracts. They could pay to go to North America.
Oh, really? Like, okay.
I'm not going to sign that contract. So as they said, hey, look, we're not going to do the indentured servant thing. We're just going to pay the fare and ride. And so the cost of transportation was going down more and more and more. Ship technology was increasing. The cost of the passage was getting lower and lower. And so as this happened, it exacerbated the need on the plantations for labor. You know, because the one thing that there was not a lot of in America at the very beginning were people to provide labor. There was a labor shortage.
I got you.
And so it was the indentured servants and the Africans. Well, as the cost of transportation and the crossing got less and less, the indentured servant said, I'm just going to pay, I'm going to buy a ticket and go there. I'm not signing that, because indentured contracts typically were somewhere between 3 and 7 years.
Right, I've heard
that.
So
you signed the contract and you said, hey, I'm gonna work off the cost of me going. And then, you know, at the end of, and here's where the 40 acres and the mule come. At the end of your indenture contract, the thing that was plentiful was land. So
Right.
they gave you land, they gave you 40 acres. You didn't get a mule, but you got 40 acres at the end of your indenture contract. And this created a situation in 1675 called the Bacon's Rebellion. And in Bacon's Rebellion, what happened was the land that was being given to the former indentured servants and the slaves or newly indentured blacks, former indentured blacks, was inferior land next to the Indian tribes. And so they were having lots of wars between the Indians and they went to the governor and said, hey, we don't want the land next to the Indian tribes because we're always getting in fights with these guys and having skirmishes.
Right.
Well, Governor Berkeley wouldn't do anything because he had a contract with him where they were giving him beaver pelts and furs, and he was selling them for a big profit in Europe.
Okay.
And so you end up with what we call the Bacon's Rebellion. And when the Bacon's Rebellion happened in 1675, the white elites got nervous because one of the things that had occurred is that the former indentured whites and the former indentured blacks had gotten together and said, we're not going to take this, and had actually rebelled against the powers that be. And so one of the things that came out of the Bacon's Rebellion were the Slave Acts of 1705. And then there was a notion of the free white man. White men were given the right to vote after Bacon's Rebellion, and blacks were not. Their rights to vote were taken away. They had a right to vote before then, because if you own land, you could vote. Their right to vote was taken away after Bacon's Rebellion. So it's not so much the things that we've never had. The bad part of America is that all of these things we have had. And through the course of America, they've been lost.
Everybody, this is what I do here, Strong Inspirations. We went around the world and back again to America to help you understand what really happened. That's what he is. He said, this is what really happened.
Well, it's in the history books.
Yeah, it's in the book. Y'all got it now.
Right.
Y'all know why it happened.
Everything I've said, you can find the history on.
Yep. And race was something easily identifiable.
Yeah, it's how someone looks.
Yes, right. But
the truth of the matter about race is that there's only one race.
That's right.
And that's the human race.
That's right.
Every modern human is 98.98% the same as every other modern human. They may look different, but when you look at their genetics and what they're composed of, they're all the same, 98.98% the same.
Yeah. Wow. Everybody hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspiration. Like I say, hit that. Now, if there's a love button, you should hit that one on what my man has said, but there's not. So hit the like button, hit the notifications bell, tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Because let me tell you, it is my charge to find the people to tell it to you correctly and succinctly, comprehensively, easily, and any other lead you need for you to be able to get this. Share this with your family and your friend. Don't keep it to yourself. And to you, my brother, I say this, and I mean this with all sincerity. I mean this. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. We're going to talk some more. You have done it, and because of your family, they have opened your eyes to, first of all, to read and to comprehend that stuff, as what lawyers do a lot of. And you have taken the mantra and shared some of what you know with us today. Thank you for doing that.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, man. Everybody, we out. Bye-bye. We'll be back again.
All righty.
Yep.